Thank you, Heather. That was beautiful. He's always been faithful to me. You know, one of the disadvantages that we can often have as corps officers is that we know the person that we're remembering less, or have known them certainly a less period of time than many in the congregation. But were you to ask me my first impressions of Shirley, I would say to you that she was a purveyor of joy. A purveyor of joy. I also noticed that Shirley didn't sit down for very long. She was always wanting to be with people, to be around people, and wherever Shirley was, there were smiles on faces. As we've also heard, she loved inviting people round to the home. In fact, based on that fact, it may not surprise you to know that we were very soon invited to the Himes home after arriving in Clearwater. We arrived at a very funny time because we got installed on the Sunday, then drove up to Charlotte to catch a flight to London for the International Congress. We came back, and within 2 Sundays, Shirley said, "You've got to come over to our house. How about tomorrow night?" And sure enough, she was ready for the 5 Harrises to walk into the home that night. She said, "I want to get to know my corps officers better." And then as we're sitting at the dinner table, she turned to me and said, "You know, I haven't understood a single word you've said yet, but I'm hoping to learn how." From a personal standpoint, something that we will always be grateful for both Bill and Shirley is the interest they've taken in our children. Genuine interest in our children. Those of you who are Salvation Army officers, certainly children of Salvation Army officers, will know that the greatest anxiousness, if you will, comes over how the children will settle in the new community that we are moved to. And it's fair to say that here in Clearwater, we have experienced the best transition that we have ever had, mostly because of this congregation and people like Bill and Shirley. I will always be thankful for that. One thing about Shirley that I really was taken with was her activeness as a local officer. I am the product of local officers. Both my parents were very active local officers. And it wasn't lost on me that she was a Sunday school teacher, a Sunbeam leader, a songster. We've heard, of course, already that she just loved to sing, and undoubtedly she would have been faithful in those ministries. And of course, we believe for those who are faithful, there is a tremendous reward, an inheritance to be had. And so it was that last Saturday, my wife were there with Chris and Judy. I'd walked into that hospital room, and Shirley was breathing actually quite normally. She really was. And so we engaged in conversation. I was talking to Chris, my wife was talking to Judy, and a nurse comes in. We figured she was coming in to make Shirley perhaps a bit more comfortable, maybe to sort of tinker with some of the instruments that were beside the bed. But then very suddenly she looked up and just said, "She's gone." I've never seen anyone pass so smoothly, just literally breathing, and then she wasn't. But for me, it was those 2 words that resonated. She's gone. And the reason for that was I knew where she'd gone to. I had no doubt of where she had gone to. In fact, very often we do this. I've talked about this before. Sometimes we can romanticize about what heaven might be like. And I think when Shirley got there, maybe it was a bit like this. 3 people arrived at the pearly gates. I know. Many of my congregations say, yes, they always arrive in 3s, but bear with me on this. There was a minister, a missionary, and Shirley. And they all arrived at the pearly gates, but were rather surprised to see that St. Peter was not there. It was some other guy. But nonetheless, they were prepared for this moment, and they were prepared for the question that was asked. Why should I allow you to enter into heaven? The minister spoke first. He said, well, I was in the ministry for more than 40 years. I planted churches. I evangelized. I wrote a number of books and pamphlets. Then the person asked, but do you know Jesus? Somewhat irritated, the minister replied, "Would I have done all these things if I didn't know him?" The missionary was then asked, "Why should I allow you to enter heaven?" The missionary sighed, "Well, for years I worked among a Stone Age tribe. Through my ministry, the whole tribe was converted. I taught people to read, I did translation work, and I healed their sick. But," said the man at the gate, "did you know Jesus?" "Could anyone have achieved these things without knowing him?" the missionary said rather adamantly. So finally the man's attention came to Shirley. "Why should I allow you into heaven?" he asked. Well, in fairness, perhaps her achievements may not have seemed quite as impressive. She went to church, she did sunbeams, she taught Sunday school, she was a songster, she crocheted blankets. She read her Bible, she prayed, she paid her tithe, she raised her children properly, and she helped in any way that she could. "But," said the man, "do you know Jesus?" And suddenly that radiant smile flashed across her face as she said, "Yes, of course, Lord. I recognized you immediately." Make no mistake, Shirley is with her Jesus, and that purveyor of joy has joy overflowing as we speak. You see, Shirley's okay now. No worry for her. Let us not be concerned at all about her. But for those of us who are left behind, there is a sting. There is a loss. There is an emptiness. And it's fair to say, I think, at some point in our lives, we've all been hurt. We've all felt loss. And sometimes people might say we've all felt injustices. And at some times in our lives, we may have raised our hands in frustration and said, "Where are you, God, in this? Where are you? Why is this suffering going on?" I think often in the world we can say that these days. And you know, it's okay to ask those questions as long as you're genuinely looking for the answer. And if you truly look, you will find a God who went to the ultimate lengths for you and your opportunity for eternity. You will find a God that loves you so unconditionally that he died for you. And you will see a God that looks at death so differently to the world and the way it views death. Colonel Speck referred to in his prayer the story of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And often I'm drawn to this particular story. We know the story so well of this family whom Jesus loved deeply. In fact, it says in Scripture that Lazarus was the friend who Jesus loved. And yet this friend who Jesus loved became very sick to the point of death. And that was what was going on when word was given to Jesus. But Jesus decided not to go back to his sick friend. In fact, he stayed there where he was for 2 more days. And you might ask the question, why on earth would he stay there for 2 more days? Well, Jesus had a great understanding of death. He had a full understanding of this particular situation. And he had a greater understanding of a purpose for all of these things. And the reality is, and the answer to the question is, remember that Jesus is always in control. Regardless of how crazy things seem, Jesus has it under control. Because he loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus as he loves you. And so as the story unfolds, my prayer is it brings comfort for those of us who are grieving. We read in John chapter 11, when Jesus finally got there, he found Lazarus already 4 days dead. Bethany was near Jerusalem, only a couple of miles away, and many of the Jews were visiting Martha and Mary and sympathizing with them over their brother. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Mary remained in the house. Martha said, "Master, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, he will give to you." Jesus said to Martha, "Your brother shall rise again." Mother said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. But Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And Jesus said to Martha, do you believe this? And here is a clear promise that was given to Martha and to given to each one of us. Whoever lives and believes in Jesus will never die. My question this morning is, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Now, Martha had gone out to greet Jesus. She was the practical sister, probably making sure the mourners were taken care of and all of these things. But Mary, the other sister, was the very quiet, sensitive one. And for this reason, there was a particular fondness Jesus had of her. And the story goes on to say that when Mary had come where Jesus was, seeing him, Mary fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Then when he saw her weeping, and he saw the Jews who came with her weeping, Jesus groaned in his spirit and troubled himself. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then it says, Jesus wept. If you see God as one who lives in heaven, far away from this world, who seems rather ambiguous towards your plight, consider what I just read and take it to heart today. He saw her weeping, Jesus groaned in his spirit, and Jesus wept. This is the God we worship. This is the God that we serve, one who sees our pain and gets upset for us. Remember, death is the consequence of a fallen world, a suffering caused by Satan, not by God. In fact, God was so bothered by the effect of sin and its ultimate power, that is death, that he sought a solution. And that solution was to allow somebody else to die in your place. And that somebody, of course, is Jesus, who has already died in your place. And that's what Jesus was referring to when he said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. You see, Jesus did die, but he came back to life, defeating death forever. And now Shirley shares in that resurrection because she believed in Jesus Christ. And I know this. I know that Shirley wants one thing for everybody here present. For you to believe that Jesus died to save you from your sins so that you too can experience the paradise that Shirley is now experiencing. What you have to do is to truly believe. Truly believe. And if there's anybody here that does not have a relationship with God, you've come here to pay your respects to Shirley, but you have no sense of faith, I want you to understand something. When we talk about heaven, we're not talking about some naive or sentimental notion. We truly believe that heaven is the reward for the righteous and that hell is the consequence for the wicked. And if there's anything in your life that you need to be absolutely certain of, it's where you will spend your eternity. Do not base that decision on a high school science class or a Facebook post or an article that you might have read. Do everything in your power to be as certain as you can what your eternity is. That's why I stand here talking about the Jesus I love. Talking about the Jesus that Shirley loves. And her biggest desire for you would be that one day, when you pass from this life to the next, that it can be said of you, that is today said of Shirley, well done, thou good and faithful servant. May God bless you.